Firstly, it doesn't have a no tweet sign on here, so that means, I guess, you can do whatever you want at this point, but just be kind. Second thing is I'm substituting for Gail Burgess, a colleague based in Hong Kong, and unfortunately Gail couldn't be here today, but this is a subject very close to my heart, so I'm not really substituting that much. Rumours that I arranged for Gail's arm to be broken so that I could give this talk instead are exaggerated. And if you're watching, Gail, you can't answer back, so that's even better. Okay, so I'm going to talk about catalysing social and behaviour change as part of the introduction today. But first, good morning, everybody. And we're really delighted from Traffic to be co-hosting the Symposium. And a special thanks to the support from USAID through the Wildlife Traps project, which I'll tell you a bit more about in a while, the Wildlife Traps initiative for the support that allows us to do that. Apologies from Gail, of course, but also I'll be talking to you about various aspects of our work in catalysing social and behavioural change, partly as a primer for workshops that we're organising on days 2 and 3 this week, which we'll hope you will be able to join us at, but also as part of the context for the symposium and in this opening session. So Traffic works to ensure that trade in wildland animals and plants is not a threat to the conservation of nature. We're a global network with staff around the world, probably a different number of countries than Kelly just said, but so I'm not going to quote the numbers, but we have staff based around the world, an HQ office in Cambridge, which is another university city not too far from here, which I have mentioned. There you go, I'm not scared. And our headquarters is based in the Cambridge Conservation Initiative campus there. We have members of our team from, certainly from the Europe team, Vietnam team and China team, as well as from the HQ office. So I hope you'll be able to speak to them over the coming days. So wildlife trade, as I hope you've gathered in being here, is a global multi-billion-dollar industry. The focus for the Symposium on these 3 days is the trade which is illegal. And that's featured prominently in media coverage in the policy environment in recent years. But it's also really important to bear in mind that many thousands of species and the bulk of the volume and the value of wildlife trade is actually traded legally. Not always sustainably, but it's legal trade. And there are important behavioural issues as much to do with trying to get that trade to be sustainable as there are to do with dealing with illegal trade. But this symposium is about illegal trade, and illegal trade's a really tough nut to crack, partly because of the fact it's not historically attracted the same sort of policy and enforcement attention afforded to other illicit trades, but also because there remain many aspects of this business that are just poorly understood. So for every elephant and rhino that are traded, there are thousands of other less charismatic animals and plants moving illegally out of sight and out of mind every day. And the drivers of behaviour for poachers, traders, consumers are often poorly understood and until recently largely ignored by those who write wildlife trade laws and enforcement plans. That's why this event is so important. I noticed on the way in that there's an event here called an endocrinology masterclass taking place right now. If you were meant to be there, you're in the wrong place, just mention that. But I couldn't help look up, and the Society of Endocrinology has been an exchange between researchers in this field since 1947. That's just the UK society. And here we're working in a field where in-depth research and exchange about human behavioural factors for threat reduction in conservation, but particularly with this area of wildlife trade, it's just a very new field to be talking about and really getting to the bottom of what's going on in terms of research. Through research, analysis, and guidance and influence, Traffic's approach, we look at wildlife trade issues in 2 work streams. One is on action to ensure benefits from sustainable legal wildlife trade, and the other 2, action to reduce wildlife crime and illegal trade, where we've really tried to look at what we can learn from criminology approaches to address problems of illegal wildlife trade. And social and behavioural change communications and approaches are relevant to both those streams and can be applied to either engage consumers directly or more frequently to those who are best placed to influence and supply them. So that's traders, it's the people who regulate. Everything what we're trying to do is really about changing some behaviour, whether that's government, private sector, consumers, individuals. We're delighted many of the partners in this endeavour that we've been able to work with are here at the Oxford Symposium. So a warm welcome and thanks to them. And we look forward particularly hearing some of the companies and others who we work with in the Changing Business Sector Behaviour workshop on day 2. I inserted this without Gail's permission. So one way we look at things in traffic is on our red and green work stream, is that both sides of this, moving towards a conservation goal, are really again about behaviour. On the red stream, it's all about increasing the effort that criminals have to get involved in the trade. That might be working with transport companies to get them to make it more difficult, maybe working with internet companies. Increasing the risks is very much about increasing the chance that you're going to get caught. That's about the behaviour of customs officers, the motivations, the drivers, the behaviour of courts, what drives court decisions and penalties, for example. And then rewards. Rewards are all about what are consumers willing to pay. And again, thinking about consumer behaviour change, demand side effects on that business. So collaborations and partnerships are essential to pull together research and evidence, insight, knowledge, suggest strategic approaches to support others to tackle illegal wildlife product consumption or foster markets that have sustainable options. There's a wide range of organisations motivated to engage illegal wildlife trade challenges now. Just a couple of new entrants this field, just to mention. UNODC, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, really not engaged in wildlife crime issues until recently, but they have experts who are working on consumption, demand side, impacts in terms of illegal narcotics and other contraband. Again, bringing those people into a community of practice around these issues has real advantages. For CITES, there are now a number of CITES resolutions actually specifically calling for action and collaboration around demand reduction through behavioural change interventions. And organisations like the World Economic Forum, which has a Global Agenda Council on Neuroscience and Behaviour, starting to think about this issue. And on a wider environmental stage, even at the CBD meeting in Cancun, we managed to deliver a remote presentation on gender dimensions of work reducing the desire for rhino horn in Vietnam. Just examples of where different collaborations, different opportunities are coming together. One example I just wanted to highlight is of innovation in this area of dealing with illegal wildlife trade is the Roots Partnership, or I should call it the Routes Partnership, which is a partnership funded by USAID on reducing opportunities for unlawful transport of endangered species, convening government agencies, transports and logistics sectors. And it's a 5-year partnership which is bringing together those different stakeholders in thinking how do we change business sector behaviour around illegal wildlife trade, particularly aimed at the transport sector. You'll hear more about that in the workshop tomorrow if you attend. Also supported by USAID is this Wildlife TRAPS, which stands for Trafficking Response Assessment and Priority Setting, which is a really amazing opportunity to do what's basically research and development work in this field. And a 7-year project in 5 work streams, and one of those work streams is to engage understanding of the true character and scale of the international response to tackle illegal wildlife trade, identify intervention points and test new approaches, non-traditional approaches. One of those work streams is on demand reduction. It's a key focus of activities here this week. We're picking up on a number of priorities identified from what's called a collaborative action planning workshop held in Hong Kong last year. That collaborative action planning workshop where EJ was, which much appreciated, you participated in that, spent 3 days exploring what works, what doesn't work, and what might work better in changing behaviour to reduce demand for illegal wildlife products. It was attended by about 100 representatives of 60 organisations across very diverse professional sectors. social behavioural change community of practice that we now facilitate was first gathered here. It included private sector, advertisers, marketeers, academics, social science researchers, NGOs, and other conservation professionals, all really united by a stake, a passion, and interest, or a mandate in some cases, to apply behavioural science to mitigate markets for illegal wildlife trade. There's film footage, expert interviews, presentations, and other highlights of this are on the Wildlife Consumer Behaviour Change Toolkit, which is a community website at www.changewildlifeconsumers.org. So please take a look. Reach out to Gail through the contact pages there. There's an amazing collection of people working together around this issue, and I think that's what it really takes. It's a great example, just like this event, to bring together different expertise to look at what are difficult issues to crack. One of the products from that, as I mentioned, is this community of practice with members of and a toolkit, which is now a sort of one-stop shop for those interested in applying social behavioural change communications and strategic approaches to illegal wildlife trade. At the moment, there's about over 200 research reports on there, briefing papers, consumer insight, evidence analysis. You can get things from there, but you can also engage, and we run webinars. There's a newsletter going to about 300 people each month, and interactive areas such as a member discussion forum, changing demands, webinar gallery, and other events on there. And the next webinar in the series will be later this week on Wednesday. It's advertised on the site. So do have a look at that. So on to looking at what's going on in this community of practice. One of the events engaging later this week is around Changing Business Sector Behaviour workshop. It's on at 9:45 tomorrow. There'll be panel presentations, plenary discussions, partner showcases there to explore recent innovations for engagement with businesses to reduce illegal wildlife trade. Working with business includes approaching to transform trade chains, and some of the partners there will include Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who've supported the Stop the Buying work and delivering more than 240 courses to help more than 10,000 business people across 45 cities in Vietnam to gain tools and methods they need to adopt corporate social responsibility policies incorporating wildlife protection. We'll also be looking this week at with the community of practice on behaviour change, an expert roundtable on monitoring and evaluation that we'll be delivering on Wednesday afternoon. And this will be looking at key opinion expert insight into this, what's really challenging facet is if you do behavioural change interventions, how do you know if they're working? How do you see if they work, and how do you change and adapt over time? There's been a lot of debate about this, about different survey methods, about different research methods, and how to interpret the results for those. And the event will be looking at some new monitoring and evaluation good practice guidelines developed in a response to requests to really pull together this information from that community of practice. So again, there'll be more information about that later this week, and there's a preliminary version of those M&E good practice guidelines to look at. So just a couple of examples. I know I'm running out of time. Experience and insight captured in the guidelines has been formed by our own research experiences in traffic, and I just want to say something quickly about research from the Chi initiative in Vietnam. So this is an initiative launched on World Rhino Day in 2014, an approach using social marketing to reduce the use of rhino horn for status reasons by a specific sector of urban consumers in Vietnam. And through research, we identified a person called Mr. L down here, who's our consumer archetype, who's identified as through a 5-step process of behaviour change and formative research into attitudes and values and the psychodemographics driving this kind of demand. So we've worked through some phases of research and messaging, which are illustrated here, but looking at this key message that prosperity from inner strength is being undermined by using rhino horn. It illustrates the central concept of Chi based on this insight, and the messaging was chosen in light of awareness and attitudes to rhino horn consumers and their relative disconnection from rhino poaching. So 3 subsequent surveys over the last few years, in 2014, 16 and 17, I think illustrate some of the challenges of assessment of impacts in this field. So focus on our evaluations of this Mr. L sample. In each survey over those 3 years we did them, a similar number of rhino horn consumers continue to report they've consumed rhino horn over the past 2 years. So that's the sensitivity during the survey period, during the 4-year period. But most claimed recent consumption, the most recent consumption people owned up to, was in the past 6 months, appeared overall to be falling during the survey period. That's the graph on the bottom left. But we also found that there were differences in that, and to cut the detail short for interest of time in the 1 minute I have left, basically we see that there's a difference between Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, where in one city you have a continuing decline in reported recent usage of rhino horn, and the other city a recent increase, an upturn. And interestingly, and for someone who's worked in wildlife trade for a long time, I've spent so many hours of my days telling people that rhino horn is not used as an aphrodisiac, and that was a minor use reported in India about 45 years ago, that actually a driver in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City, is a belief around sexual potency effects from rhino horn consumption, and that's a new factor kicking in just recently. So we see the overall trend, and as an assessment of the Chi intervention, you could say, well, this isn't good news, we've got an upturn. On the other hand, we've got an upturn with a very clear diagnostic factor that we can start to target in the next phase of messaging. So anyway, a lot more information around this is in Chi briefing paper available on the Traffic website that was launched on World Rhino Day last Friday. So I better cut to the end and miss out looking at these statistics. But again, this is looking at promoter scores and what people are willing to say about their willingness to recommend that people don't use rhino horn. And we're seeing people who've been subjected to the Chi messaging are more likely to say don't use rhino horn. And we're learning quite a lot about how this difference between how people are picking up the messaging and how they're recommending based on that messaging, and then what their actual behaviours are, which are some key steps. Anyway, more on that on the Wednesday workshop. I better wrap up. This is Gail, who should have been speaking now, with her arm intact at this time. And we miss her obviously here today, but a lot of the work that I've tried to summarise quickly is work that she's been leading in traffic. I hope this brief introduction and overview gives a sense of some of the types of activities that are going on in this sphere of social consumer behaviour change, and some of the opportunities around what the importance of the events like this to share experiences and ideas, but also some of the things that are going on, like with the toolkit online and the community of practice that you can engage with. So overall, I'd just like to wish you all a productive, successful symposium. There's a lot to learn, a lot to catch up on compared with research, analysis, thinking, exchange in other fields. Thank you for all being here this week, and good luck with the week.